Blind versus blind. Danny Tang is down to 9 big blinds. Fedor wondering what to do with 9-6 offsuit. And he is going to start with the limp. Danny's got to be pretty happy that he's going to not have to auto-fold this. He doesn't have the option to check. All right, so we're going to get a free flop here, 9 big blinds effective. 2 garbage hands.
Yeah, 2 garbage hands that are happy to see a flop.
Ooh. Now, I imagine this favors Fedor, right? Like, just given
to the flop, yeah,
yes,
because he elected to play his hand, and Danny didn't raise when given the chance. So yeah, Fedor stabbing here, especially with a spade, makes a lot of sense. You should favor stabbing spades. Danny's going to have a lot of suited hands, right? Suited hands that don't raise, that just want to see the flop. That's what happens in a lot of these spots. So
we're expecting Danny to have jammed 2 broadways pre-flop, giving him land 9 big blinds. So we say this wouldn't hit him, but he's still going to call here a bottom pair, expecting Fedor to just take random stabs.
Yeah, Fedor has a better than average hand to stab with for a nothing hand because he has the spade, and in fact, I mean, this is a bit of a tricky card. I mean, he got called, but yeah, Fedor would love to bluff deuces out, right? Which is what Danny has.
Or like a really funny jack. Is that possible? Like a jack 6 of hearts, you know?
Yeah. So he has a lot of incentive to bluff, and again, having the spade pretty big. It's not a spot you're obligated to take by any means.
That's definitely worth considering.
Yeah.
Now, you're Danny.
Not so often that we do a breakdown with such a short, effective stack, but trust me, this one's going to get interesting.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing so far is how clearly and easily defined Danny Tang's range is. Fedor can have a few more things he could have been trapping pre-flop, and he bet the flop. Now, having checked the turn, that changes things a little bit, right? It means he's less likely to have some of the top-end hands, but he could still have some of them.
Sure, he can.
But Danny's range is like, basically, we think pre-flop he's probably jamming any king.
Yeah.
Even most of his good jacks. So his range is basically just deuces and jacks because he's probably going to jam on the flop with spades too, right? Or any sort of queen 10 if he happens to have it.
I don't even know if he can have queen 10 because pre-flop, I think he's jamming that almost always. But if somehow he had it, he would have jammed the flop.
Right.
So yeah.
So his range is very weak and very easily defined, right? And he has one of those hands, obviously, as the deuce.
Yes, that's exactly right. Like, I don't even think he ever really has 2 pair. I think if he somehow had jack 8, I think he's always betting that on the turn when check too, right? Like, he's not just going to give a free card almost ever.
Almost ever. But
8 deuce, same thing. I think he really has just a jack or a deuce.
I think that is mostly the case here. Yeah. So with that in mind, now Fedor doesn't know if he hit 2 pair or not because Fedor has to act first. But should have Fedor bet the turn, knowing that by the turn already Tang's range is very weak? Should Fedor just be going for it?
You know, my first inclination was absolutely, right? Like, he's got the 6 of spades, which is kind of a nice little backup plan.
Backup plan. There you go.
Know what I'm trying to say. Just in case we get called again. The thing is this, Danny's not going to fold the jack if we bet, if that's the best thing he can have. Danny's never going to fold just because Fedor looks strong. Like, that's not how it works at these levels, right?
Maybe he's going to fold his jacks that don't have a spade with them. It's possible.
Maybe, but then he's going to call his deuces that do have a spade with them, right? So it's probably pretty much, he's going to call his best jacks and then a pair that has a spade and fold all the worst pairs.
Right. So maybe it's just not worth it against an elite player.
You probably feel like you're not folding out enough. Danny's going to call enough of the time that it should make Fedor indifferent to betting, and I think that's why Fedor doesn't bet.
Yep. Speaking of betting.
Uh-oh.
Nitro betting!
Hello!
25 millibits. That's how much they will match on your first deposit when you use the link in our pinned tweet. That is a significant portion of kashish.
That's like $750 if you're doing the math.
Just get in there. That also has our monthly tournament. It has Bitcoin squares, which is a cool thing that you can do. It has March Madness brackets for everything. I don't care what month it is. It's bracket time. Get in there.
Here. River is the 8. It's going to be really hard for Fedor to take a stab here, I imagine, with this card pairing.
Yeah, Fedor definitely has to be worried about a deuce or a jack. I mean, not as kings as much. I mean, you have to think Danny,
with that stack size, a lot of incentive to bet
the
turn, right?
A lot of king X type hands like would just jam versus the limp, right? Because you're almost good enough to call. So like if it's good enough to call, you just jam when the guy limps. It's like, oh, you're trapping me, like God bless you. But
so it does look like Danny has a deuce, or he's gonna go for it with the 9-6 offsuit. That is a ballsy play. Danny knows his hand looks like a jack or a deuce. But what do you do when you think the guy knows what you got? Do you do the hero call? I mean, like, this is tough, right?
this is just like, look, Danny. I mean, they've been doing this. Danny's been staring at him all day. I wonder if he's going to do it again. Yeah, this
is sick.
This is a tough spot. I mean,
no easy answer, right?
Yeah, there's no easy answer here.
Oh, I thought for a second. Those are time bank chips. He's going to need a lot of time here. He knows his hand looks very weak. Will Fedor go for this bet check bet line? I mean, you know, if Fedor had a king without a spade, he got a lot of incentive to bet the turn too, right? So maybe Danny's like, well, do you really have a king here?
Maybe, but he could for sure, right? I mean.
Well, yes, of course, with mixed strategy.
Yeah. So, sure, sometimes he'll bet the turn himself, but not. And then the nice thing is when the turn gets checked back, like it feels like a spot you could even overbet a king. Obviously, Fedor could have an 8.
You could have a random 8.
Way more than Danny because, you're right, like Fedor. It's hard for Danny to call on the flop with many hands that have 8s, but Fedor's going to be bluffing a ton of hands. Like he has 9-6. Like, why couldn't it be 8-6?
Guess Fedor could have a random flush too, right? Given how small the effective stack size was on the turn.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, but I think if we're going to do the minimum for Fedor's value bet, it's a king. King's up here, right? And bluffs, but the thing is he can have a lot of bluffs. Because, I mean, there's just going to be a lot of hands that are nothing the way this got played. So it's just a spot where, yeah, Danny's, you know, bluff catching.
Wow, he makes the call with the pair of deuces. Yeah. Amazing.
Okay, we can get into some very complex things here.
Oh, my gosh.
Especially based on who we know these people are and how they play poker.
Yeah.
So let's just get to it. Let's get to the nitty-gritty of how Tang ends up winning this really kind of massive pot for his tournament here with 10 left, and Fedor, you know, giving a lot of money away, and whether or not Fedor should have done this. Let's start with that. Should Fedor have shoved for significantly more than pot here on the river as a bluff?
Okay, so what Fedor I think is doing is he's aware if he bets 200K, which looks more believable, but he's going to get sort of a very typical type of distribution of calls from Danny, and it's probably Danny's going to probably call the right amount of the time, and so we're probably indifferent to even betting here is my guess, because Danny always has a jack or a deuce. We know this.
Yep.
Danny's going to call with the right amount of pairs enough of the time that it's not going to be great for us to bet.
Right.
If we bet 500K, maybe we can just make him fold almost everything.
Yeah,
that's the idea.
The tournament life play.
Yeah, like you still have like 8 blinds, bro. Like it's the same as 10 basically. Nothing's changed. You don't have to call it off here.
Yep.
And guess who can have trip 8s? Fedor.
Yeah, Danny never has trip 8s by itself. Sometimes maybe he could have had jack 8 or 8 deuce, but not anymore because we didn't hear from him on the turn.
Almost never does he have that.
Right.
So it's like just a deuce or just a jack.
Right.
That's it, man.
And Fedor knows that he has 9-6 off in his range, which means he has a lot of 8s combinatorially in his range.
Sure.
And he would have played them all probably exactly like this. So
Fedor can have trip 8s, Danny can't.
Right.
I mean, that's powerful.
So Fedor's mostly repping that and a little bit a slow played flush, which is going to play into the much more complex side of things here, which is Danny Tang's decision.
Yeah.
How does one make this decision as Danny Tang? Which hands are you calling with? At least we know our range is well defined, so we know where to start, right? We have pairs of jacks and we have pairs of deuces, and they come in different combinations. And how do we choose which ones to call with?
Right. Well, so one thing we normally would do is we'd say, well, what are the better hands? Like my jacks are better than my deuces. I should call with that. But of course, we also want to block Fedor's strongest holdings, and having a spade in our hand is going to do that because Fedor could have spades and played them like this.
Yeah, there's less likely than trip 8s, but it's possible.
Absolutely. He might have checked that because he figures we're just going to fold too often on the turn and doesn't want to scare us off and give us a chance to, deny equity or whatever. So having a spade in our hand feels like if we're going to pick something to bluff catch with, having a spade in our hand is a pretty good idea, right?
And having a spade is more important than having a jack versus a deuce because what Fedor's repping is either a flush or trip 8s, right? He's not repping a good jack or anything like that, or like or pocket 9s or something like that.
I mean, I guess he could have like a king that he played this way.
But we're doing the same against those hands with a jack or a deuce.
Exactly.
So it doesn't matter if it's a jack or a deuce. What matters more is if we have a spade. So I think we do have to call with any hand that has a spade in it. So Danny does have a spade in his hand. He makes the call. That makes sense. We probably also have to call with our better jacks or else we're just folding a little bit too much.
Exactly.
Yeah. The ones that don't have a spade in it. Now, if we want to go even further and ask the question, what is the very best card that we can possibly have in our hand?
As a blocker.
We have a theory that maybe the deuce of spades is the best card you can have as Danny Tang. Because if Fedor were to have a flush, it's possible that his most likely flush holdings would be the deuce X of spades because of how he played the turn. Deciding to check the turn means that he feels that sometimes Danny's going to bet if he has a flush, right? And if you have a deuce, you block one of Danny's two pair types. He either has a deuce or a jack. And if you block the deuce, that means the jacks populate more of a percentage of Danny's range.
Right.
And the jacks, especially those without a spade, may bet when checked to for equity denial, whereas the deuces are less likely to. So we're more likely to get a bet in by checking on the turn when we have the deuce X of spades in our hand as Fedor, meaning that's the best blocker to have as Tang because that's the type of line that would make sense for Fedor to use.
And just to be clear, the reason why a jack would be more apt to bet, both would be denying equity in theory, but a jack can actually get called by hands that it's beating and a deuce really can't.
Yes. So that's a little complex. It's a little tough to get through even for me to like even say it, but I think he's supposed to call with any spade, but maybe the deuce of spades is the legitimate best one.
Maybe it is. It's a little unclear to me if that's really true, but it's at least, it can't be worse than any other spade. It might be better. So that's a reason for sure to call. I think Danny is supposed to call here. He does.
Yeah.
It looks amazing.
It does.
When he actually does. He takes a while because it's like, am I really calling off the 5 deuce here? Like,
the answer
really?
is yes.
It's a 50K. First place is 1.4 million. There's 1.3 million between here and there. But yeah, the answer is yes.
If you want to get to the next level, you're Danny Tang, you're playing these elite high rollers, and you're playing against Fedor Holtz, you have to make decisions like this.
By the way, Danny Tang makes this call, and guess what? He rides this hand all the way to second place and almost $1 million.
Way to go.
Yeah.
Danny Sprung was tasked with solving Fedor Holtz, and Danny Tang, Danny solving Danny. That is the name of a show that I would watch. It's about a detective named Danny who has his own personal demons, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
And?
So he also is a psychologist. So he's a detective and his own psychologist.
Oh, he's his own. So Danny is solving himself when you say solving Danny, not solving someone else named Danny.
No.
Oh, that's really surprising to me.
Yeah, that's good, right?
Oh, really good. Really good.
All right, let's see if these guys did good.
Yeah, let's detect some psychology about this.
Let's do that. Psycho detection. All right, so on the flop.
Yeah.
Fedor can bet range. That makes sense. I mean, Tang's just going to have to fold so much at the current stack depth.
Indeed.
Tang has an easy call. He has a pair.
Yep.
Easy stuff so far, Pio. Thank you.
Agreed.
On the turn, Pio bets most of Fedor's single spade combos. He does have a single spade with 3 on the board. But it doesn't have a huge EV preference versus checking. So like checking is fine.
Right.
But it does prefer to bet, and it wants Fedor to bet his hand, basically. Tang can mix between checking and betting, and he checked, which is fine. So Pio is pretty much like, hey, if you're Fedor, you can do whatever you want. It mixes checking, betting smaller, and shoving with his hand. The jam is the preferred action, though.
Interesting.
So Fedor got it right, according to Pio.
Okay.
All right.
Wow.
And 5 deuce with the spade does call the jam. The deuce of spades is a relevant blocker, and Pio cares, and it wouldn't have called if it didn't have the deuce of spades.
Well, yeah.
So,
but wow.
I mean, Danny Tang. Woo!
Danny solved Danny Tang.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Woo, I want to wipe the sweat off my brow after that one. That was a lot. Okay, so what do you think about all the different decisions in this hand? I would say if we're going to drill down, really the river is where it gets most interesting, where Fedor decides to go for it in a very big way. Pio's kind of split on if he should do it or not. It wants Tang to call with bottom pair, no kicker, with 1 relevant blocker. What do you think about all this? Do you agree or not? Just because the robot says it doesn't mean we should do it. What do you think? What do you think about these guys' decisions here?
Do what the robot says and join our Discord, because it's
Join
Pio approved.
Join the Discord.
The link's in the description.
Join the Discord.
We'll see you there.